All right. Well, good morning, church. Good to see you guys. I've got your Bibles with you. We're going to be in Job chapter 30 today. Job chapter 30. Well, some of you know this about me, big history nerd, and so I wanted to share a story with you from recent American history to introduce our text this morning. In late October 1991, a warm weather storm system made its way across the Atlantic Ocean and developed into a Category 2 hurricane that was eventually named Grace. Well, eventually Hurricane Grace weakened in strength and actually turned north and made its way up the Atlantic Ocean. Now, at the same time that this was happening, a very large area of low pressure, known as a nor'easter, had began to develop off the coast of Nova Scotia in Canada and caused some coastal flooding, high winds, other storm-related things, and it made its way out into the ocean, where it actually intersected with Hurricane Grace to become an even bigger storm. Now, according to meteorologists, these two storms colliding out over open water by itself wouldn't really have presented that much of a threat to anybody. But the added challenge was that at the same exact time that was happening, there was a very large area of high pressure coming down from the Arctic north and east that also intersected with these other two storms and pushed the entire new hurricane system back towards the coastline, where it would go on to cause over $200 million in damages and even take the lives of 13 individuals. These kind of rare circumstances of three separate storms coming together so late in the season and so far north in the Atlantic Ocean led meteorologists to refer to this weather phenomena as the perfect storm. A set of incredibly rare sets of circumstances that just so happen to come together at the same time to wreak havoc on everything around it. And of course, the reality for all of us is that we too experience perfect storms in our lives, where separate, random, rare sets of circumstances just so happen to come together to form a perfect storm in our life that wreaks havoc on everything around us and also causes lots of damages. You know, I don't think it would take me long if I were to go around the room and start talking to each of you before I would hear some incredibly tragic stories of storms that you faced in your life, something related to financial struggles, marital issues that you're facing. Maybe you lost a job, or somebody close to you died, or you're dealing with rebellious kids, or the insurance company isn't cooperating with the claim that you put in. The list would go on and on and on. And so the question for all of us this morning in here is this: when these perfect storms come in life, what are we supposed to do? In other words, what is it that God is wanting to teach us, and what does He want us to believe when we're in a season of perfect storms? And so with that in mind, we're going to be Job chapter 30 this morning, starting in verse 15. Now, if you're just joining us for the first time, or you're not familiar with the book of Job, a little bit of review for you. The story of Job is essentially the story of God allowing Satan to wreak havoc on a man named Job's life, who was very righteous, in order to test his faith. Satan essentially challenges God, says, hey, he's only a righteous guy because he's got a pretty easy life. And so God allows Satan to bring some tragedies into Job's life in order for him to have his faith tested. God puts one caveat on there. He says you're not allowed to take his life. Now, when you read the story of Job, at first, it really actually doesn't seem all that bad. At first, the only thing that he loses were his oxen and his donkeys. But then you read further in the text, you find out he also loses his sheep. And then you read on, he also loses his camels, and then all of his servants get taken away, and then his kids actually die in an accident in their house. And then to make it all worse, Satan attacks Job's health, and he's inflicted with boils and sores. And really, to put the cherry on top, Satan and the bad guys in the story allowed Job's wife to live, because essentially they're like, dude, she's so bad we thought she was on our side. We thought she would do more damage in your life by staying in there, because Job's wife, as we looked at a couple weeks ago, one verse in the entire Bible, and in that verse she says this: curse God and die. What a wonderful woman to be married to. I'm sure those were some real fun conversations, and so one thing after another builds up in Job's life, and then he's left with irritating and irksome people, and it all comes together as a perfect storm. And so the rest of the book of Job is essentially this conversation between Job and his friends and gods as they very poetically describe the reality of the situation that he's facing. And so with all that going on, Job just lets all of his emotions out there and is honest before God. And we're going to read part of his response here this morning. Job chapter 30, verse 15, if you're following along. It says this. This is Job speaking here. Terrors are turned loose against me. They chase my dignity away like the wind. My prosperity has passed by like a cloud. Now my life is poured out before me, and days of suffering have seized me. Night pierces my bones, but my gnawing pains never rest. My clothing is distorted with great force. He chokes me by the neck of my garment. He throws me into the mud, and I have become like dust and ashes. I cry out to you for help, but you do not answer me. When I stand up, you merely look at me. You have turned against me with cruelty. You harass me with your strong hand. You lift me up on the wind and make me ride it, and you scatter me in the storm. So Job's looking at this entire situation that he's dealing with, all the pain, all the suffering, and he describes it using the imagery of a storm. Terrors are turned loose against me. They chase my dignity away like the wind. My prosperity passed by like a cloud. You lift me up on the wind, and you scatter me in the storm. Now, let me tell you something. My wife and I have lived here in the state of Colorado for 7 years now, actually, this month. And we love Colorado. Colorado's awesome, has so many wonderful things that we love. Hiking, fishing, mountains, a professional baseball team that sucks, but I still watch them every single year because I love them, right? All kinds of great stuff. Let me tell you something that you don't have in this state, okay? What you guys do not have in this state are really good, powerful thunderstorms, all right? That's right, I got an amen there. The thunderstorms in this state kind of just trickle over the mountains, and then the wind dissipates them, and they brush here and there, and then they kind of move on before they build in strength. Is anybody here originally from the Midwest or the Great Plains? Yeah, that's right. So all you Colorado natives, those people that just put their hands in the air, they know what a real thunderstorm is, all right? I'm talking about that kind of storm. You're sitting at my parents' house on the porch. You can see it on the horizon. You watch it develop and grow in strength for hours. It's enormous, it's strong, and then it hits you. And the rain pours down constantly all day long. There's lightning from one side of the sky to the other nonstop. The thunder is so loud you can literally feel it in your skin. That's a real thunderstorm. That's the kind of storm that Job is describing here in this text. It is raging at him. It is pounding at him, and it's not going to stop. So he lets all of his emotions out there, and he says this. He cries out to God for help, but he doesn't answer him. Can I just ask, has anybody ever cried out to God and not gotten an answer before? That's right. Common story, happens to all of us. Big fisherman right here. If I had $1 for every time I prayed to the Lord of the harvest to help me catch a fish, church, I'd be able to replace all the carpet in this building with marble flooring, all right? We cry out to God for help, but he doesn't answer us. We don't have time to dissect that entire idea, but I think one hard truth that we need to learn within that is that from God's perspective, a perfectly acceptable answer to some of our prayers are either the words no or not yet. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but let me give you a little bit of an insight here for this. This perfect storm that Job had to deal with is something that actually a lot of characters in the Bible, some of the most well-known, incredible characters in the Bible, also had to deal with. Okay, listen to this. Joseph, sold by his brothers, betrayed by his employer's wife, stuck in a prison cell that he didn't deserve. King David, the youngest of 8 sons, ridiculed by his brothers, lost his best friend in battle, mocked by his own wife, wild accusations made against him, lived as a fugitive for years. Fast forward to the New Testament, the Apostle Paul and his missionary journeys have been beaten, chased, arrested, scourged, caned, whipped, imprisoned, denied justice, and eventually shipwrecked and put on house arrest. Church, if perfect storms were inevitable realities for some of the most well-known characters in the Bible, we shouldn't be surprised when the same things come into our life. So what are we supposed to do then? What are we supposed to do in those perfect storms? Well, to tie back into that question that we asked earlier, if you look closely at Job's response, what is he doing with God? He's being perfectly honest about what it is that he's experiencing. He's laying it out there and giving very honest thoughts about what he's experiencing. The text never tells us that God comes in and tells him to shut up or that he shouldn't have said anything or anything like that. We're going to look at God's response in a little bit and see some of the strong language he uses. But what God does here, like a good, compassionate father, is that he simply listens to his kids as they describe to him what they're feeling. And so let me bring this home for you right now, okay? Maybe for you, that means you have recently lost a job, and you need to admit to God that you're scared for your future and you don't know how you're going to provide for your family. Maybe you are dealing with some marital strife or some other relational challenge, and you need to admit to God that you are scared and how you don't want to be alone in the future. You're surprised that things are where they're at now. Maybe somebody close to you in your life recently passed away, and you need to admit to God that you're mad that happened sooner than you ever thought that it would. Or maybe you're dealing with some health crisis, some bad news that you got from a doctor, and you need to just admit to God that you're scared for your future and you don't have enough strength to face what's before you. Whatever your particular situation is, church, be honest with the Lord. Let it out there and know that like a good, compassionate father, he's going to listen to what you have to say. And so that's what we see as the first part of Job's response here. We get this idea of full honesty from Job. Now, we don't have time to look at all of Job's response, but if we were, what you would notice and see is that Job, in his honesty, eventually went a little bit too far. He went too far in his honesty and almost got to the point, the idea is that he challenged God and essentially telling God he's wrong for allowing that stuff to happen. And so he crosses that line, and then God gets a chance to respond to that perspective from Job. Now, we're going to jump over to Job chapter 40, but to set the stage for Job chapter 40, I'm going to stop real quick in Job 38, because in Job 38, this is the first time that God talks in the book of Job since this stuff has gotten started. Chapter 38, the book of Job is only 42 chapters long, so that gives you an idea right there of how long God just patiently listened and waited. And so God comes in here, and his response at first seems pretty harsh. But what I hope to show you today is that it's actually an incredible response on God's part to meet us where we're at. Okay, so this is Job 38, verses 3 to 7, setting the stage for God's response to Job later, right? So it says this, chapter 38, verse 3. God says, "Get ready to answer me like a man. When I question you, you will inform me. Where were you when I established the earth? Tell me if you have understanding, who fixed its dimensions? Certainly you know. Who stretched out a measuring line across it? What supports its foundations? Or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang for joy and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" All right? Now, I don't personally know what God feels necessarily in these kind of situations as he's watching Job and his friends, but I'd like to think it's a little bit how I see my toddlers interact with one another and with me, especially when they're trying to convince me to do something or to not do something or give them something, right? So here's a quick example from our life, okay? So in our household, I have 3 kids, 4, 2, and 0. We do not let them watch TV on Mondays, Wednesdays, or Fridays, just trying to limit that. And so what that forces them to do is to get creative with how they spend their time and play. And so they come up with some cool things and fun games, and whatever strange, boyish reason, I've got 3 boys, they like to play with water, specifically a lot of running water. And so what they will do is go to our bathroom sinks, and they will turn on the water while it's running a little bit. They'll go grab all their toys, and they'll play in the water, waterfalls, washing it off, all kinds of fun stuff, right? And so as the father in this situation, I'm standing back off to the side, and I'm having this internal battle with me, because half of me is going, this is so cute. They're doing it, they're getting creative, they're finding a way to spend the time, and the other half of me is that is literal money going down the drain. All I see is a water bill going up and up and up, so what do I have to do? Well, eventually as the dad, I step into this situation, I say, all right, boys, time for us to shut the water off. No, Dad, 5 more minutes. I don't think we can afford 5 more minutes, kid. We got to shut this thing off. Oh, come on, Dad, just a little bit longer, a few more toys. I said, no, we need to shut it off now. And then I start having to explain how this costs money, which you can't explain that to a toddler, right? And so Benjamin, and my oldest, kind of starts to get a little bit more interactive with me. And he's like, well, I'll pay for it, Dad. I got my piggy bank in my room. I'm like, this is not the point, kid, right? So I'm trying to then respond in the same way that God does Job here. I'm like, oh, you'll pay for it, will you? Well, what job do you have? What do you do for a living? Where were you when I bought this house, right? Who supports the foundations of this family, right? So I think that's kind of the idea that's going on here, but what's the point I'm trying to make in this story? What's this, okay? I, as the authoritative figure in that situation, I can see things, I can understand things, I have my reasons for doing things that they cannot understand, and I need them to obey, and get this, trust me. Even when they don't like that answer, even when they can't understand why. Church, it's the same thing with God. He's the authoritative figure in our life, and he can see things, he knows things, he has his reasons for doing so, even if we don't like that answer, even if it doesn't make sense. But God wants us to still obey him and get this, trust him as well. So what God is getting frustrated with Job in this text is not the fact that he was honest. We just looked at how God patiently listened and allowed him to be honest. What God got frustrated with Job at was his lack of faith. He crossed a line where he stopped trusting God in the midst of that storm. So I'm going to say it like this, okay? This is how I want you to remember it. God wants us to be honest in our suffering, but not hopeless. God wants us to be honest in our suffering, but not hopeless as we do so, and still trust him through all of those things. And so God says all of that, and then we can get to Job chapter 40, where a similar response on God's part happens before Job himself responds. So with God keeping that idea in mind of us wanting to trust him, to submit to his authority, his status in the situation, comes back to Job in chapter 40 and says this, the Lord answered Job, will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who argues with God give an answer. Then Job answered the Lord, I am so insignificant. How can I answer you? I place my hand over my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not reply. Twice, but now I can add nothing. And so God's response like that goes on for a couple of other chapters, but he gives Job this chance to respond real quick. And in a sense, he kind of gets, he's like, all right, I recognize I crossed that line. I recognize I went a little bit too far. And then God responds this way. And this is huge, church, okay? This is big. Verse 6 of chapter 40, then the Lord answered Job from the whirlwind. Get ready to answer me like a man. When I question you, you will inform me. Would you really challenge my justice? Would you declare me guilty to justify yourself? Do you have an arm like God's? Can you thunder with a voice like his? And God responds in similar language for another couple of chapters, which we don't have time to cover, all right? A quick little side note, okay? We're getting into some language here. Verse 7, God says this, get ready to answer me like a man. Some of your translations might say something like brace yourself or dress yourself for action, all right? Literally in Hebrew, this would be translated as gird your loins like a man. So men in the room, let me ask you, when was the last time you girded your loins? Huh? Like, when was the last time you did that? Actually, why don't you stand up for a second, man? I want you to grab your loins for a second. Stand up. All right, nobody jumped it that good. Some of you still trying to figure out where your loins are at. You can ask your wife when you get home on that one. So, all right, what's the idea that's going on here, okay? This Hebrew phrase is the idea of getting ready for some physical work or labor or even some warfare, right? It kind of carries the modern sense of let's roll these sleeves up, buckle up, let's get down to business, all right? So God is telling Job, listen, you need to brace yourself because this thing isn't over yet. Look at some of the language that God uses in this passage, really interesting. The Lord answered Job from the whirlwind. Would you really inform me? Challenge my justice. Declare me guilty. And then get this, verse 9. Can you thunder with a voice like his? What's God doing here? He's picking up on the same storm imagery that Job himself used back in chapter 30. Because here's the thing. This storm that Job is facing is not over yet. It's still going on. Even as God responded, and even as Job recognizes he maybe went a little bit too far, the storm is still going on. Okay, that loss is still real for Job. The pain is still tangible. The grief is gut-wrenching. It hasn't ended yet. It's ongoing right now. And God's saying, brace yourself, because this thing is not over. But there's a clue in God's response that really helps us understand what it is that we're supposed to do in these perfect storms. Look at verse 6, all right? Verse 6, and somebody answer me this question. Where does God answer Job from? From the storm. From the whirlwind, the text tells us, okay? Do you get this, church? God has not moved on from the storm. He's not outside of the storm. He's not trying to play catch up. He's right there in the midst of the storm with Job as it's going on and as it continues going on. And he's saying, I need you to trust me. I am here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm right in the midst of it all with you, and I need you to trust me through it all, because God did not abandon Job in the storm. This is the big idea I want you to keep in mind. You forget everything else I say this morning, that's fine. I don't even care. Remember this right here. God allowed the storm to happen, but he did not abandon Job within. God allowed that storm to happen, but he did not abandon Job within. God was not the one who caused these things to happen. That was Satan. But God, in his authoritative role, in his wisdom, in his knowledge, allowed it to happen and yet did not abandon Job within the storm. Deuteronomy 31:6 promises us, God promises his people to not be afraid of what's in front of you, because he will never leave you nor abandon you. God allows the storm to happen, but he does not abandon us within. So God's response goes on for a couple of chapters, and then we pick it up in chapter 42, where Job gets a chance to respond one more time. And so this is Job chapter 42, starting in verse 1. Then Job replied to the Lord, I know that you can do anything, and no plan of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this who conceals my counsel with ignorance? Surely I spoke about things that I did not understand, things too wondrous for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. When I question you, you will inform me. I had heard reports about you, Job says, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I reject my words and am sorry for them. I am dust and ashes. So Job finally gets it now. We might say he knew about God before, but now he really knows God. He's crossed back across that line, if you will, to the realm of faith. He went from being faithless to being faithful. He went from being full of doubt to being full of faith, and he finally gets it, and he surrenders himself to the Lord once again. That phrase there, I reject my words and I am sorry for them. Literally in Hebrew is I reject and I relent. It's the same word used elsewhere in Scripture for the word repentance. So Job is repenting from his perspective, from his lack of faith, his doubt, and saying that I now fully understand that my role in this, and I'm submitting to God. So he came to believe that God allowed that storm to happen, but that he did not abandon Job within. But remember, church, that storm is still going on as Job says those things. It is still real. He still has a lot of questions. He might be wondering why this had to happen, and yet in the midst of that, he recognized that needed to happen in order to perfect his faith in God. And so he fully surrenders to God and trusts that he allows those things to happen, but he never abandons him within. And I wonder if that's what you're dealing with as well. Whether your perfect storm is something that happened distant in the past or something recent, or maybe something that's happening right now in this season. That storm is still real. The pain is still tangible. The loss, gut-wrenching. You still have questions. You're wondering why. And yet, you have the opportunity to ask yourself if you've ever surrendered to God in general, or for that specific thing, fully surrendering that to him and coming to believe that God allows things to happen, but never abandons you within those things. Because here's the thing, church. That perfect storm that you're facing might just be the thing that God is using to perfect your faith in him and to cross back in that line, just like the story of Job. So we all have an opportunity to come to believe God allows storms to happen, but never abandons us within. That's what Job had to come to believe. That's what all of us have to come to believe. And that's what a man named Greg Cruzy right here in our church had to come believe as well. Greg's been a part of our church for the last 7 or 8 months, and through a set of incredibly rare and unfortunate circumstances that just happened to come together for a perfect storm in his life, he came to believe that God allows storms to happen, but that he never abandons you within these storms. So I want you to check out Greg's story and see how God never abandons us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Greg Cruzy. I am 22 years old. I am from Missouri. I first got connected here at Valley View. Gene, he happens to be friends with the pastor that I had back home in Missouri. I was a bowler early on in life. I was actually pretty good at it. I was a soccer player. I played up through my junior year in high school. I had plans that I wanted to be an airline pilot after my first time ever being on a plane. Whenever I was in 7th grade, I believe, I just thought I could live life my own way. I thought I had my own path, and I thought I was doing pretty good at it. I was working for UPS, and I had plans to one day fly for them. And so June 9th, that day, I get out of work, I walk across the street, get in my car, and I just jumped in, started it up, and started driving. I saw a car coming head on at me in my lane. I just remember seeing him come head on at me like this. I thought we were gonna hit full on head on. And at the last second, I remember watching him swerve, and then we hit like this, driver corner. And then I blacked out. I woke up on the ground, not really sure what's going on. I ended up waking up the next day in the hospital, and I couldn't see. That was the biggest turning point for me, that I had to stop and realize, clearly I've been living life the wrong way. I was trying to live it my own way. Figuratively speaking, my eyes were opened at that point for me to see that, I need to straighten myself out. I gotta go to the Lord and see how He wants me to live. One of the first things I said to my mom after that was, I guess it's better to be blind and alive than dead. If there's something we gotta be grateful for, A, it's the Lord, but B, so what if you lose your eyesight? Life's not over because you lost your eyesight. I'm alive. I survived. My freedom was gone. I couldn't just go get in the car and drive and go somewhere anymore. I had to accept reality of, this is my life. We've all gone through some hard times, and there's days that it's still rough, and we're all gonna go through that, but you just gotta ask yourself, what can I do to push through it? If that means you gotta sit there and say a prayer, I don't care how many you gotta say. We all might feel like the Lord isn't answering, or maybe He's ignoring us. I asked the same thing, why did I have to go blind? Out of all things that could have happened, I would almost have taken anything else over being blind. I might not get an answer in my time of being here still of why I went blind. My blind life is my best life. And that's very honest, sincere statement out of me is, I've been living life a lot better, not being able to see. I've been able to open my ears a little more and pay attention to what the Lord's saying and not what I'm thinking. We've all heard the line, we walk by faith and not by sight. As a blind person myself, and a few others that I know of at the school with me, is they'll tell you the same thing, is you don't need sight. Walk by what God has to show you. Walk His path. It took 2 decades and losing my eyesight and being in a really bad car wreck for me to get myself to come closer with the Lord. My grandma, she was attending the church that John, Gene's friend, is the pastor at. She was telling me that the youth pastor there, Sean, he would have just loved to reach out and connect with me. Sean ended up coming over to my house. He said, "Where do you stand?" I said, I can definitely say that I've waken up a bit more, but I said, I kind of still feel like sort of still in the middle here. I said, I know that at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what I think. I'm going to have to go with what the Lord wants, and that's for me to come closer to Him. After having that conversation, he's like, well, there's no better time than to start right now, is there? And I said, well, I guess you're right. I guess I can't sit here and argue that one. We ended up setting up a date. I think it was about a month later. I think it was in September of 21 whenever I got baptized. Getting baptized, it's just the best feeling that you can possibly have. And we've all been told in the Bible is God's going to use all things for good. Not some, but all.
All things for good, church. Well, Greg, I want to invite you to come on up the stage here, man. Yeah, I can give Greg a hand, guys. Around the table, my friend. There you go. There you go. All right, my dude, there you go. Hey, a little insight into Greg's personality. A little over a month ago when I asked him if he would be okay coming up in person to share a little bit more after his video, he responds and goes, well, it's not like I can see anybody. So, a little comedian at heart here. So, Greg, as I said earlier, thank you for sharing your story, first of all, and more importantly, thank you for responding to the call that God had on your life. I know this June is coming up on 2 years from the accident in this new life. So in those 2 years, tell us what you feel the Lord is teaching you. What's been that which He's revealing to you?
Well, I think, again, it's first and foremost to say thank you to you guys, for allowing me to have the time to come in and share, what I've gone through in life, to hopefully open the eyes of all you guys, and there, plenty of other people out there in the world. The biggest thing that I've realized is, like I said, walking by faith and not by sight. We can all sit here all day long and say that we're good at it, but, until you're physically walking through it, not seeing a thing, you're putting your trust in the Lord and say, okay, well, hopefully you're going to guide me to where I need to go. If I'm walking home from school, and I got to cross Bowles and Santa Fe, well, Lord, help me get across Santa Fe, 8-lane highway, or anywhere else on Santa Fe for that matter. But, it's that, and, just faith, hope, and love, that's the biggest thing you can do is have those things, trust in the Lord and share it out with all the others, all your family and friends.
Oh, that's great, Greg. Well, thanks for sharing. You're standing in a room of, I don't think anybody's blind or even partially blind in here, so what can we learn from you? How can we help you out? What's something you would share with us so we know how to best interact with blind people from all across the spectrum?
So, the biggest thing that I always tell everybody is just to ask. Don't treat us any differently because we're blind. One of the hardest things to tell is, how blind really is a person. Blindness is a large spectrum, but at the end of the day, we're either totally blind like I am, or, some people can only see light perception, or some people have a gradual eye disease, so they might still be able to see you and see your car, but, eventually they're going to end up in the same boat as me. I think that's one of the big key things there. And, the other big thing that I had thought about, and I forgot to mention earlier, was, I know you had told me about one of your friends who was blind. It really doesn't matter what you're going through. And for us being blind people, yeah, you can look at us all day long and we're going to be blind for now. But, let's face facts. There's going to be one day we're going to wake up. And, the Lord's going to be the first person that we see. And that's far better than anything else, that we could ever ask for.
That's right.
And the other thing is, we're all going to have struggles. You guys, your struggles might be different than mine, I'm facing blindness, facing a reality check of what the life is like for a blind person, even to get a job, it's not easy. So granted, we're all going to go through some hard stuff in life, but, somebody else out there has it worse. And, you guys can easily stand here and look at me and think, oh, that guy's got it hard because he's blind. Well, that might be true, but, maybe you got something going on in life that's worse than me being blind, and I can sit back and say, well, I feel bad for you, you know. So the biggest thing is, you know, having that trust in the Lord, and you know, if us blind people can get through life and deal with the hard days, you know, we all can put our faith in there, and we're all going to get through it together.
That's right. Oh, thank you for sharing, Greg. What a testimony. Let's thank Greg again, guys.